Hello! Our next project is Project 2, Old New Shoe. And this is an opportunity for you to create a three-dimensional object through observation and additive sculpture. Before we get into the project and the project description and tutorial, I want to talk just a bit about the different types of sculptural techniques and then the specific type we will be utilizing for this project. Sculptors primarily use 4 basic techniques in creating their artworks. These are either subtractive in nature, which means that materials are removed or carved away, or they're additive in nature, which means that materials are added and built upon the surface. The 4 basic sculptural techniques we see are carving, casting, modeling, and assembling. Carving involves cutting or chipping away from a shape from what we might see a mass of stone, wood, or some other type of hard material. Carving is a subtractive process whereby material is systematically eliminated from the outside in. The artist allows the image to emerge as they're removing some of that surface material. Now, sculptures that are cast are made from a material that is melted down. It's a solid made liquid, usually through heating. And then that liquid metal is poured into a mold. The mold is then allowed to cool, thereby allowing that liquid metal to harden again. And metals that we usually see with casting are bronze or aluminum. And casting is an additive process. And there are several types of casting techniques that we see with the use of materials like metals or even sometimes plasters. So we might see casting being done through a burnout method, such as something like lost wax or foam, or through creating a mold and then filling that mold with a liquid substance like plaster or wax that will then harden. But each different technique, casting an object from a space that is either filled with an object that has been carved or designed and fabricated to melt away, or filling a space that the shape was created by an object that was molded. Now, modeling is something that we see often used in hand building ceramics or like clay building sculptures. And modeled sculptures are created when soft material or malleable material, such as clay, is built up upon itself. Sometimes this is done using an armature, or sometimes it's done just by building that surface upon itself. And then this additive technique helps to create a form that emerges from the addition of the material. Likewise, modeling is an additive process. And then finally, assembling. So sculptors that are gathering and joining different materials together create an assembled sculpture. We call these types of sculptures assemblages. And these are additive, and they can have several different layers and techniques included. If we were thinking about this in a two-dimensional way, we might refer to this work as collage work. But because it's three-dimensional and it's utilizing several different materials or mediums or objects, it's called an assemblage. So it's assembling or gathering all of these different mediums or materials together to create one cohesive sculpture. An example of some assemblages are done here by Betty Sayre, who is a master assemblage artist. So the primary function of additive sculpture is to give creativity to the artist by combining similar parts to create a complete piece. Again, in additive sculpture, you're adding upon the surface to pull out the image and to pull out the details of the work. In an additive sculpture, the whole sculpture form is built by adding different elements, different materials, different components together. This differs from subtractive processes like carving, because in subtractive processes, the artist relies on the removal of the material to reveal the sculpture. You're carving away the stone, you're carving away the wood. And in that carving process, in subtracting the material, you're revealing that form, and
after
the
a
artist
story
is
was
building
told,
that form
or
by
people would
removing
use the
surface.
mask as a prayer
So the artist takes
for
the
a good
whole form
hunt or
and the
different
whole
things.
material and starts to work on it,
Detailed
removing the material
and use as little cuts as possible.
one part at a
I
time,
think about every
until
cut
they're
I'm
left
making
with the
and
form that they are trying to achieve. So for our second project this semester, we will be making an additive sculpture using one medium only, and that material is masking tape. So again, with additive sculpture, you're building upon itself. So you're taking that tape, in this case for this project, you're taking that masking tape and you're using that masking tape to build on itself to create a form. And that form is a shoe. And so this project is Old New Shoe. It's one of my favorites. And you're going to be creating an exact replica to scale of a shoe of your choosing through observation and additive sculpture technique. So I want you to find a shoe, dig through your closets. It could be your favorite shoe. It can be a shoe that you might think is a little bit easier to do for this exercise, but pick a shoe that's interesting, that has some detail, and has some elements that you can replicate that will help bring that form together. And by working from observation, it really teaches you to become more visually aware and to see more fully, right? You're really observing and you're really studying that object, and you're going to be replicating what you see of that object, not what you think that object should look like, but what you actually see. And so this project asks you to build an exact replica of a familiar three-dimensional form directly from observation. Now, additive sculpture is really interesting because it provides a living 3D sketch of the actual object. You're sketching three-dimensionally as you go. We do not have to imagine what we are going to make because we're making it. We have a live sketch in front of us and we can make it right by adding material to it. You're building that object as you go. And I want you to think about this in terms of observation and transformation. I want you to activate all of your senses. I want you to look at this object. I want you to touch. I want you to observe this object from life. Put the shoe on. See how it bends. See how it adapts depending on how it's being used. But I really want you to use this observation and tactile quality to be able to replicate and recreate your shoe. Now, observations are really important in art making because they provide us an opportunity to understand and practice the elements and principles of design that we are studying. So to begin, I want you to prepare your workspace. Make sure that all of your materials are ready. And the materials that we're going to be using for this project are, of course, masking tape, an X-Acto knife or scissors or any other type of cutting blade that you have, your reference shoe, and I want you to keep that reference shoe on your workstation. Make sure that you're constantly going back to it, you're checking it, you're touching it, you're seeing how the different elements of the shoes connect together. Also paper. Paper is handy to jot down measurements, to take notes. In a few moments, we'll talk about whether or not you want to make a full-scale model out of paper or create a template out of paper that you can use for your work. A ruler or measuring tape, and of course, a cutting mat. So make sure as we move into this tutorial that you have all of your materials ready. All right, so on that sheet of paper in your sketchbook, I want you to create a list of observations. So I want you to really, again, look at your shoe. I want you to examine it. I want you to study it. I want you to rely on that visual observation and also touch and write down what you are seeing and feeling. Think about the texture, the different fibers, the materials of the shoe, the lines you see, the different sizes that are included in the different details of the shoe. What elements are in your shoe? Does it have a softer fabric? Does it have metal? Does it have different details or embellishments? Really observe all of these key elements that make up the shoe. And remember, no details are too small, and write all of those things down, because this is what is really going to help you pull that character and form of your shoe together. Once you do this, next, I want you to close your eyes and observe the shapes and lines as you're touching your shoe. So really feel around the shoe, feel for the slopes and angles, the softness or the rigidness of the different materials. And as you're doing this, well, once you've stopped, add those observations to your list. So really think about how can you examine this shoe holistically, and how can you take notes for yourself so that while you're building, you can reference back and go back to these notes. You might also notice that if you have a used pair of shoe, or if it's a really well-loved or well-worn shoe, there might be some slight differences in the sole. So it might not be a solid, crisp sole. There might be some wear, there might be some holes. And remember, you want to replicate this exactly, so be mindful of those. This is also, at this time, while we're making this list of observations, it's also a great opportunity to practice your blind contour exercise, which is included in the assignment sheet. And it's not required for this project, but it's a really great exercise to consider. And if you submit your blind contour with your sketches, it will be extra credit. So it's a really good, the blind contour is a really good mix of what you're capturing through observation, what you're feeling through touch, and really allowing your eyes to guide your hand in replicating what you see. So if you're interested in adding that blind contour as another step in developing this project, the directions for that are included in the assignment sheet. All right, so we're going to get right into the tutorial of this project. So before we start working into the materials, I want you to start thinking about the structure of these shoes in terms of planes and surfaces. Now, in order to build up your shoe, you will have to first deconstruct it to see its various planes in order to understand how the shoe is put together. Now, you can actually deconstruct it. You can take the shoe apart, you can cut into it. And I just want to caution you, if you're working with an old shoe, or you get an old shoe and you take it apart, don't just cut into it, but really look along the stitching of the shoe. Get yourself a seam ripper from Joann's and remove the shoe by removing its stitches. Don't just cut it apart, but remove those stitches so you can see where the fabrics were joined and went together. Now, of course, you don't need to actually cut your shoe apart and deconstruct it. You can also visually deconstruct it. So this is, again, observing it and observing the different planes, observing the different pattern of the shoe. What are the different elements, and where are those elements conjoined, and where are they stitched together? What surfaces are harder and how do they curve? Really think about all these different planes and surface areas of the shoe, and then you can make those out of paper, and those then become your pattern for the shoe. So again, some students do choose to make a complete paper model of the shoe by making a template of the various planes as we see it on the right here. And then these planes become a pattern or a guide that the student uses while they are constructing their shoe out of tape. You don't have to do this. It's just another approach. Everyone has a different approach to how they do this. Some do like to have more of a template, like to have more of a plan, like to have a pattern, and some like to just additively build the tape or the tape fiber on top of itself. It's really going to be your choice, and you're going to figure that out as you work with this exercise. Now, if you do want to make a paper template or a paper model, don't use heavyweight paper, just plain old copy paper, plain paper that is malleable, that you can move around and shape is really the type that you want to get. And also, if you're making a paper model, don't worry about any details or any craftsmanship. This is really just a dry run of working with the tape. And so this really helps you understand the planes, the proportions of the shoe, how to construct it, and the overall dimensions of the shoe. So the intention is really just to discover these different elements and to think of this as kind of a 3D sketch, but it's just an optional step, and it does not need to be done with any sort of detail. All right, so step one. Step one is to create your planes or your surfaces or building materials. We can call them your tape fabric for this exercise. And so to get started, you need to make some of these tape surfaces, since we want the shoe to be made out of nothing but masking tape. And I don't want there to be any other tape, no Scotch tape, no blue tape, no duct tape. This is just masking tape and masking tape alone. And of course, you can use other materials or media to help you, like rulers or straight edges or X-Acto blades, but your material is masking tape. And because of that, we need to create some surfaces or fabrics that you can mold and bend with the tape itself. So to do this, start with a clean surface, and I want you to stick down a piece of tape that is no longer than the shoe you are trying to make. You can make it actually just a little bit longer, but you're going to make several of these different fabrics, and so make sure to conserve the tape that you are using. And then you're going to lay down a second piece and make sure it slightly overlaps the first piece, and you're going to keep doing this until you have a sheet of this fabric, this tape fabric, that's wider than your shoe. And you'll understand why it has to be wider than your shoe in just a moment. All right, so once you have that first step, you're going to repeat the next step on top of it. So you're going to gently peel that first layer off of your tabletop and place it sticky side up. And then you're going to, on top of that first strip, place down another strip of tape, sticky side down. So it'll be sticky side to sticky side, so that the final piece will be flat on sticky surfaces. So you're doing the same process of overlapping and laying it down until you finish the whole width of the piece. And so you'll end up with a tape fabric, a sheet of tape fabric. It'll feel a little stiff at first, but you'll be able to cut into this, you'll be able to work into it, bend it, shape it, mold it. It's also okay if it's a little sticky around the edges. You can take your X-Acto blade and clean off that edge if you don't want that stickiness, or if that's going to get into the way of your work. But this is the way that you're going to create these pieces of tape fabric that you can use for your different planes, for the different surface area, if you need something with a little bit more density as you're building up your shoe. All right, so the next step is to build up your planes and your structural components. So once you have your tape fabric, your different sheets of tape fabric, and you can go ahead and in advance make several of these so that you have them on the ready as you're building up your surface and building up your different planes in your shoe. So you're gonna, the next step is you're gonna grab one of your tape fabrics and you're going to place your shoe on top of it and use a pencil to trace around the edge of the shoe. And then you're going to use your scissors or your X-Acto blade to cut out your shoe template. So this serves as a replica of the sole of your shoe. Now you may want to make this slightly larger than your actual shoe, knowing that as you work with it, it might fold up a little bit. It might actually get a little bit smaller. So if you want to just cut around that edge and give yourself a little bit more breathing room, that's a small note to keep to yourself. It might help you out in the long run. So you're going to do this twice. You're going to repeat this step on a brand new surface. You're going to take that tape fabric sole template that you just cut. You're going to place it down on a new clean sheet of tape fabric. Again, that tape fabric is 2 layers of tape, sticky side to sticky side, created so that you have a wide piece that then serves as your fabric of your shoe and the surface of your shoe. So again, you're going to take your first sole that you've cut out, you're going to put it down on that piece of fabric, and you're going to trace around it. So then you're going to end up with 2 of the same soles. And then your next step is to take those 2 soles, and then you're going to place them together so that you have created a dimensional sole. So this is where you're going to start building up on your surfaces. This is a 3-dimensional object, so we need to start giving some dimension to this tape fiber, this tape fabric. One way to do that is to start building up on top of this one of the sole templates that you cut out, and you can do this by rolling the masking tape so that the sticky side is facing out. You could use scraps or filler. You can make the masking tape into balls to fill up this space, but you're really just trying to build up the surface so that when you put your second replica of the sole on top to almost create a sandwich, you have some dimension. And this is going to vary depending on whether your sole is 1/2 inch, 1 inch, if it's a platform, if it varies, if it goes from 1/2 inch to 1 inch. This is really where you're going to want to measure what that width is and replicate that with your filler. The example of this shoe is pretty flat, so it's a pretty easy filler. But if depending on the shoe, if it has a little bit of a heel, if it has a higher heel, if it's a hiking boot, there's going to be a difference in the height, and you're going to want to replicate that with your filler and with how you're developing your sole of your shoe. So then once you have all of your filler tape, whether it's rolled up, balled up, scraps, remember this is just tape, so don't fill it with any other material. You're going to want to close that and conjoin it. And you can wrap around it with tape. You can go around the edge of that very neatly with tape. But the point is you want to join those 2 different pieces together. You don't want it to be too tight, and you want it to mimic the shape and scale and depth of the sole of your shoe. So the next step is just to create more sections. So create some more of your tape fabric if you haven't already. And then take another moment to observe the shoe, looking at the planes, looking at where the stitching is, looking at where the different elements connect, and to really start to go back to your list of observations and check, what does the side of your shoe look like? And then using your pencil, sketch the outline of the side of your shoe onto your tape fabric. This is also an opportunity, if you've created that paper model, this is where you would use your template pieces, almost like you would a pattern, right? If you were making a dress, you would cut apart those different patterns. The same instance here. If you've made a paper model, this is where you would use that like a pattern. So then once you have your different plane of the side of the shoe sketched out or outlined, or and you used your paper template, you're going to cut that out and start attaching it to your shoe. So you're going to start repeating this for every different section, every different plane that you see, make it little by little. One tip is that if you segment this shoe out in just a few spaces, it won't be as malleable. It won't be as easy to create those curves, to create those areas where the shoe comes together. So piece by piece, smaller pieces by smaller pieces, pieces that you can cut and fold on top of each other, so you're creating those angles and you're creating those folds, is going to be really, really helpful. And take it slow. This is a project that takes a lot of time. You have a few weeks to work on it. Really get a head start. You want this to be realistic. An additive sculpture takes a long time because you're building from nothing, literally, to something that has dimension and weight and depth. And think about how thin masking tape is. And this is what you're building upon itself to create dimension and texture and shape and form. So give yourself time. All right, and you're going to continue doing this. You're going to continue creating the base structure of your shoe by tracing out those planes, observing it, looking at the back of your shoe, the front of your shoe, the inside of your shoe. What does it look like? What do you need to do to add to that tape fabric to replicate what this shoe looks like? You can always go back to sketching what it looks like first before you actually make those changes on your tape fabric. So just as you did with the sides of the shoe, you're going to add the different planes, the front, the back, and just keep building up the shoe. Now, you want to make sure that even before you start to add the different elements of tape to build up that surface and build up the details, you want a base skeleton of your shoe. We don't have an armature for this project, so you kind of want to create a base skeleton that then you're going to build this shoe upon. It helps maintain the integrity of the shoe, and it helps give you a surface to work with. So then once you have your replica pretty well constructed, you have those base elements done, you have your skeleton, you have your framework, now you can add your details and you can really start to clean up the look and make it more realistic and make it more of a cleaned up, replicated version of your shoe. So again, you're going to observe the front, the back. You're going to observe the texture, the seams. You're going to look at the different fabrics, the different materials, and you're going to want to replicate it in your material, in the tape. So think about the seam lines. Think about the stitching. Are you replicating that by using your X-Acto blade? Are you cutting up very, very thin strips of the tape? Do you have shoelaces? Are you replicating the metal edge of the shoelaces? How are you doing that with the tape? But really, this is your time to start adding those details in and really making this shoe as realistic as you can. And so all of the previous steps are setting you up to now move into the details. And remember, you want to have a strong foundation. You want to have a really solid framework. You want to have a shoe that's pretty set up so that you can build upon and continue that additive process. So here's where you're going to dive in. You're going to look at those details. Here you can see this sole of this shoe has a little bit more complexity than just a flat surface. And so how can you use that tape to create movement that would replicate what a real shoe would? How can you use the tape to create folds, to create curves? What do you need to build up in the shoe itself? So then your next step, step 5, is one of the final steps of your process. And this is to clean it up and pay extra close attention to the details, because again, the details are what are going to bring your shoe to life. Think about the changes in dimension and thicknesses. Think about those details like buckles or clasps or zippers. What are the material changes? How are you going to show that change through texture? How are you going to manipulate the texture? Make sure that all your tape edges are sticking to the other pieces of tape. Make sure that there isn't that sticky tape unless that's a surface that you're trying to replicate. You want everything to be smooth. Again, unless there's a texture that isn't smooth that you're trying to replicate. Remember, if there's uneven edges, if there are tears, that you're cleaning those up. You're folding those tape edges so it isn't rough and ripped apart. You want it to be a smooth, zapped replication of your shoe. And go back to the elements that you hadn't visited in a while. Go back to the sole, go back to the interior of the shoe. Remember, this is a three-dimensional piece. You can see it from above, from below, and all around its sides. So paying attention to the inner tongue of the shoe is going to be very important, to the inner sole of the shoe, all elements of the shoe. Go back around, make sure the details are there, make sure any frayed or ripped or sticky or torn edges are cleaned up. All right, once you are happy with your shoe, once you've achieved the exact replica, you've built up on those surfaces, you've used your tape fabric as different planes, you started to additively add tape upon tape upon tape to build up that surface, and you're ready to submit it, you are going to submit images of your shoe to Blackboard, and you are going to have to submit several images this time. So I want 6 total images, and I want 3 images that are photographed from the front, the side, and the back, so I can see that the entire shoe was worked on. And then I want 2 images that show specific details of your piece, and at least 1 in-process image. And that'll be due a little bit early so that I can see that you're making headway on this assignment. So the 3 images, again, front, side, and back. And you can see here that I've left out the back image, but this just illustrates that I want there to be 3 total images: a front view, a side view, and of course a back view. And make sure that those images are well focused so I can really see the amazing detail that you're going to be giving these shoes, like the detail of these straps and the buckles. And these are all previous student work. I also want to see 2 images that show details of your shoe and at least 1 image of you in process. But I just want to know that you're getting a head start and that you've got a good framework for this activity. So just some things to reflect on as you're building this shoe. I want you to break the shoe down in terms of planes and find the pattern in the construction. Shoes are, yes, some shoes are machine made, but making the craft of shoemaking goes back centuries, and they were handmade. Shoes are still handmade from patterns. So find what those patterns are and recreate them with your fabric, which is tape. Use your tools like the X-Acto blade or a straight edge to help with some fine cuts and some fine details. Use that tool to your advantage. There's very few materials and tools allowed in this project except for tape and cutting implements like scissors or X-Acto blades. So use those to your advantage. Experiment with using tape like planes of paper, but also a sculptural tool to build layers and dimension. This is a dimensional object. It shouldn't be flat, and your shoes aren't going to be flat. They're going to have varying elements of thicknesses. So use that tape not only as planes of paper or planes of fabric, but use the tape to build upon itself and to create different ridges, to create volume, to create dimension. So the tape should be used in several ways as those planes and surfaces, but also additively to build upon itself, to create that form and to create that volume and density. And reflect on that observation. Keep looking back at your shoe to make sure you aren't missing any details. Go back to the notes you did when you did your observational exercise. Keep your shoe on your workstation so you can be constantly referencing it, holding it, measuring it, etc. And just some final notes. Duplicate all of the details. Those details are what really are going to bring your shoe to life. If you can see it, if you can feel it, create it with the masking tape. Build it up with that masking tape. The sole of the shoe, the stitching, mesh, raised surfaces. These are just some examples of what you can see and what you can feel. Don't change the scale of the masking tape shoes. You're making these to scale. They are exact replicas. If you can get your foot in there, even better, but that is not a requirement. But the final solution should be the exact size and have the same proportions of the actual shoe that you are replicating. And then finally, so you have quite a bit to work on these. You have a few weeks. And I really, really want you to get started right away. This is a really awesome project in additive sculpture, in taking a material and really transforming it in a way that it is not intended to be used. So it's very experimental, it's very transformative. It can also be very frustrating because it's one medium that you are manipulating in a vastly different way than its intended use. So I really want you to give yourself time to work out all of the challenges and frustrations and really make this material work for you in the best way that you can. So please get started soon. It will take you the full 3 weeks to finish this project. So you should start straight away. And again, I'm going to want to see in-process images. So I really want you to get a start on this. And I want to see some significant progress. And we will be critiquing these after they've submitted, so about a week after they're due. And if that changes, I'll let you know. Again, you're uploading those 6 total images, 3 angles, 2 details. And don't use any filters to alter the work. Capture it in the best lighting. If you need to adjust the lighting in your images, that's just fine. And as always, I wish you lots of joy amongst the frustration with this project. It's always an awesome result, even if it's a bit of a painstaking process to get there. But remind yourself, you're starting from rolls of tape, from a completely flat surface, and you're taking that and building it into a dimensional object. So it takes some patience and perseverance, and I wish you the best of joy as you move through this project. Please email me if you reach a stopping point, if you need some questions answered or what have you. It's bjmarrari@alaska.edu. I'm always happy to hop on a Zoom and troubleshoot with you. So take care, happy art making, and I look forward to your old new shoes.